Sunday school friends, it's Mrs. Russo. Welcome to the fourth Sunday of Lent. We are marching steadily onward toward Easter, and we're walking in the footsteps of Jesus. And what we're going to be talking about today and investigating today and this week is that Jesus gives us a fresh start. And a fresh start means like a second chance. Yeah, that we get a second chance to make good choices. We get a second chance to do it better and to do it more lovingly and to do it kinder. So I want to read a book with you today called The Spiffiest Giant in Town. Do you know what it means to be spiffy? It means to be sharp dressed. That you feel good about yourself because of the way you're dressed and the way you're carrying yourself. This is a book by Julia Donaldson. Pictures by Axel, Scheffler. You might have read stories from this team before. They also wrote Room on the Broom, which is a really fun Halloween book, and also The Gruffalo, which you might have read before, because those are really popular books. But Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler also wrote The Spiffiest Giant in Town. But that is not what spiffy looks like, friends. No. That looks a little rough. And there he is, the giant. George was a giant, the scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown sandals and the same old patched up gown. I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town, he said sadly. But one day George noticed a new shop. It was full of spiffy clothes. So he bought a spiffy shirt, a spiffy pair of pants, a spiffy belt, a spiffy striped tie, some spiffy socks with diamonds on the sides, and a pair of spiffy, shiny shoes. Now I'm the spiffiest giant in town, he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind in the shop. He was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the sidewalk stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so very long and so very cold. I wish I had a long, warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his striped tie. "It didn't match my socks anyhow," he said, as he wound it around and around the giraffe's neck. It made a wonderful scarf. "Thank you," said the giraffe. As George strode toward home, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said, as he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat. It made a magnificent sail. "Thank you," said the goat. George strode on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. But look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a tiny, ruined house. Beside the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down, and now we have nowhere to live. I wish we had a nice new house." Oh my. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. "It was giving me blisters anyway," he said, as the mouse and her babies scrambled inside. The shoe made a perfect home for them. "Thank you," they squeaked. Now George had to hop along the road now, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself. "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse, but look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a campsite. Beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sleeping bag," said the fox. "I dropped it in a puddle. I wish I had a warm, dry sleeping bag." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his socks with diamonds on the sides. "It was tickling my toes anyway," he said, as the fox snuggled into it. It made a very fine sleeping bag. "Thank you," said the fox. George hopped on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe's on a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. But look me up and down, I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a big, squishy bog. Beside the bog stood a dog who was howling. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's this bog," said the dog. "I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his spiffy new belt. "It was squeezing my tummy anyway," he said, as he laid it down over the bog. It made an excellent path. "Thank you," said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. My belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. But my pants are falling down. I'm the coldest giant in town." Suddenly George felt sad and shivery and not at all spiffy. He stood on one foot and thought, "I'll have to go back to the shop and buy some more clothes," he decided. He turned and hopped all the way back to the shop. But when he got there, it was closed. "Oh, no," cried George. He sank down on the sidewalk and a tear ran down his nose. He felt as sad as all the animals he had met on his way home. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bag with something familiar poking out the top. George took a closer look. "My gown!" he yelled. "My dear old gown and sandals." George put them on. They felt wonderfully comfortable. "I'm the coziest giant in town," he cried, and he danced back home along the road. outside his front door stood all the animals he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. "Come on, George," they said, "open it." George untied the ribbon. Inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and a card. "Look inside the card, George," said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. Inside it said, "You gave your scarf to a cold giraffe. Your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with the sandals and gown of the kindest giant in town." The end. George thought he would just do a good thing by taking care of himself and getting himself some spiffy clothes, and he soon realized it was way more edifying for him. It gave him much more warm fuzzies inside to help other people with his spiffy new clothes. And his cozy clothes were very much more suited for him, the kindest and coziest giant in town. That's the thing about doing God's work, is that we get a chance to try lots of different ways to show God's love to the world. We get lots of different chances. We might make mistakes, and that's okay. We just have to keep trying and trying again to do the right thing and to show God's love, just like our spiffy, cozy, and kind giant did. Try and try again. So all of these videos this week you're going to see all over this Children's Chapel page are all going to be about getting a second chance and how Jesus gives us those chances to keep showing God's love and doing God's work. Have fun. I'll see you soon.